My name is Heather Merrill, and at 33 I finally learned what my own family thought I was worth. It happened at my brother's engagement party, in front of 60 guests. Nolan lifted his glass, looked right at me, and told the room I was faking it for sympathy. Then he reached down, grabbed the arms of my wheelchair and pulled me onto the floor. My father stood over me and called me the family's biggest failure. My mother turned her face away, like the sight of me was something she had to survive. But here's what none of them knew. For 2 years I had been quietly collecting the one thing they could never talk their way out of. None of us could have guessed that within 15 minutes, 5 officers would walk through those doors, and the whole room would go still. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary women face impossible families and answer with steadiness instead of noise. If you believe the quiet ones are the people you should never underestimate, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Let me back up 2 years, to the version of me my family wanted everyone to believe in. I live alone now, in a 1-story apartment about 25 minutes from the house I grew up in. Everything in it sits where I can reach it. I drive my own car, a sedan fitted with hand controls, and I work from my kitchen table doing legal research and probate paperwork for 2 small firms. I am a paralegal. That word matters later, so hold on to it. People hear wheelchair and they reach for a softer voice, and I've stopped correcting them, because correcting them takes energy I'd rather spend on the work. My family never reached for a softer voice. They reached for the phone, and when they called, it was usually to remind me not to make a thing of the past. Let's not drag it all back up, my mother would say, like the past was a body we'd buried together and agreed never to dig up. They called it a single-car accident. The report called it a single-car accident. The whole town called it that sad business with the Merrill girl who lost control on County Road 12. And every time I closed my eyes, I remembered headlights. Not my headlights. Headlights coming at me, high and wide, from a truck that was never in anyone's report. I'd press my palms flat against the cold aluminum of my armrests and try to hold the memory still long enough to trust it. My family had a word for that too. They called it confusion. I was starting to call it evidence. Here is the story everyone agreed on. 2 years ago, on a wet night in October, I was driving home from work when I lost control of my car and went off County Road 12. The car rolled. I spent 9 days in a coma. When I woke up, my spine was injured at the level of my chest, and the official account of my own accident had already been written, signed, and filed without me. By the time I could form a sentence, the crash report was a closed door. My father had spoken to the responding officer, who happened to play cards with him on Thursdays. My mother had told the hospital social worker that I'd always been a nervous driver. The narrative was set in concrete before I could lift my head off the pillow. I tried to tell them about the truck. I tried more than once. My brother Nolan would crouch beside my bed, take my hand and say, in that warm voice he uses, "You hit your head pretty hard, Heth. There's no truck." And after enough months of that, after enough Thanksgivings where someone changed the subject the moment I said the word, the family found a cleaner way to handle me. They decided I wasn't confused. They decided I was performing. "She's just faking how bad it is," I heard my father tell my uncle once, in a kitchen, not quite quietly enough. Some people like the attention. I sat in the next room and listened to my own father turn my spine into a costume. I didn't say anything. I was already learning that the loudest thing I owned was paper. My father was Merrill Hauling, and Merrill Hauling was my father. He built it from 1 truck and a second mortgage when I was a baby. By the time I was grown, it was 11 rigs, a yard off the interstate, and the closest thing my father had to a soul. He used to say the company was the real family, and the rest of us were shareholders. Nolan was the heir. That was settled the way weather is settled, without a vote. My brother had spent the last few years getting his commercial license sorted so he could drive the long routes himself, then move up to running the dispatch board, then someday run the whole thing. And right around the time of my accident, the company had been chasing the biggest contract in its history, a regional distribution deal that would have doubled the fleet. My father wanted that contract the way other men want to be remembered. Anything that threatened the company threatened the only legacy he believed in. So when his daughter kept bringing up a truck that supposedly didn't exist, he didn't hear a wound. He heard a liability. He'd look at me across the dinner table and his jaw would set, and I knew he was running the numbers on me, the way he ran numbers on a load that didn't balance. In my family, the company always voted first, and the company had decided that what happened to me on County Road 12 was a closed account. I was the only line item that wouldn't reconcile. For 2 years, I let them think I'd given up trying. It's amazing what people tell you when they're sure you've stopped listening. The engagement came in the spring. Nolan proposed to Bree Calloway, a kind, slightly anxious schoolteacher who looked at my brother the way you look at a man you've decided to trust completely. The whole family lit up. Suddenly, there were menus and seating charts and a rented lodge out at Carlton Lake, and my mother had a project that wasn't pretending I was fine. I watched it happen from the edge, the way I watched most family things now, parked at the end of the table while the planning swirled past me. Nobody asked what I thought about the venue. Nobody asked if the lodge had a ramp, which it barely did. When I brought it up, my mother waved a hand. "We'll figure something out, honey. Don't make it complicated." I sat there with my palms on the cold aluminum of my armrests, and I kept my face even, because I had learned that my calm unsettled them more than my anger ever could. Then my mother said the thing she'd been holding for 2 years. She was folding napkins, not even looking at me, and she said, "We just want one happy thing. After everything you put this family through. After everything I put them through. I had gone through a windshield, and somehow I was the one who had put them through something." I didn't argue. Arguing was a door I'd stopped walking through. Instead, I went home that night, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened a letter that had come that week from my insurance company. It was a denial. And buried in that denial was the first crack of daylight I'd seen in 2 years. The insurance company had refused to cover a piece of equipment I needed, a better chair, and the denial letter said I could appeal. To appeal, the letter explained, I had the right to request my complete file. All of it. Medical records, billing, and any incident documentation connected to the claim. I read that paragraph 4 times. For 2 years I'd been told the past was closed, off limits, none of my business. And here was a form letter from a faceless insurer reminding me that the records of my own body belonged to me. As a
Paralegal, I knew exactly how to ask and exactly who had to answer. The next morning, I started filing requests. I requested the hospital records. I requested the billing detail. And then, because something in me had never stopped seeing those headlights, I requested the responding agency's full incident file. Not the one-page summary my father's friend had handed around, but everything. Every attachment. I worded it the way I'd word it for a client, calm and specific and impossible to brush off. I didn't tell my family. There was no reason to. As far as they knew, I was a problem they had successfully filed away. An insurance denial had just handed me the one thing they never expected me to ask for. Paper. Real paper, with letterhead and signatures and dates. The kind of thing that doesn't change its story when a man with a card game on Thursdays asks it to. I dropped the requests in the mail, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt something in my chest that wasn't grief. It was patience with a direction. It took about 3 weeks for my father to find out, because small towns leak. Someone at the county office mentioned to someone at church that the Merrill girl was pulling her accident file. By dinner that Sunday, my father knew. He didn't shout. My father almost never shouts. Shouting is for men who've lost control of the room. He just set down his fork, looked at me, and asked what I thought I was doing. "Appealing an insurance denial," I said. "That's all." "That's not all," he said. "You're digging." I told him I had a right to my own records. My mother jumped in, her voice climbing. "Why would you want to relive it? Why would you do that to yourself? To us?" And then my father said the sentence that became the drumbeat of the next 2 months, the one I'd hear in his voice, and my mother's and even my own head when I couldn't sleep. He leaned back, folded his hands and said it quietly, like wisdom. Let it go. For the family. For the family. As if the family were a delicate thing I kept threatening, and not a wall that had been standing on my neck for 2 years. I looked at the people around that table, the people who'd signed papers about my body while I was unconscious, and I understood something clean and cold. They weren't asking me to heal. They were asking me to stay quiet. Those are not the same request. I said, okay. I said it gently, so they'd believe me. Then I drove home, 25 minutes through the dark, and checked my mailbox. The first envelope had arrived. I want to stop here for 1 second because I know some of you are watching this for a reason. Somebody in your life has told you to stop remembering something you know happened to you. If that's you, hear me. Write it down. Keep the paperwork. Don't argue with people who need you to be wrong, because you'll never win that argument and you don't have to. Comment the word remembered so I know you're out there. Now, back to that first envelope. It was the crash report, the full version, and I read it the way I read everything, slowly, with a pen. And the longer I read, the more I felt that old cold travel up my arms. Not because of what it said, because of what it didn't. There was no section ruling out a second vehicle. None. In a serious injury wreck, you'd expect the investigating officer to address it, to note skid patterns, debris, point of impact, and to write the words, "No evidence of a second vehicle," if that's what they believed. This report simply skipped it. And there was something else missing. The EMS run sheet, the report the ambulance crew fills out at the scene, the one that records exactly what they saw before anyone tidied the story, wasn't attached. A crash report and an EMS run sheet are two different documents, written by two different sets of hands. My father's Thursday night friend wrote one of them. The paramedics wrote the other. I sat at my kitchen table at midnight, looking at the gap where a second vehicle should have been ruled in or out, and I picked up my pen and wrote a new request. This time, for the ambulance crew's own words. Getting an EMS run sheet is not like ordering a pizza. There are privacy rules, custodians of records, request forms that have to go to exactly the right office, or they sit in a tray for a month. I knew all of this, which is the one place my family's low opinion of me had it backwards. They thought my job made me small and bookish. My job made me patient and precise. And patient and precise is exactly what you need to pull a thread out of a bureaucracy. So I filed correctly, I followed up weekly, and I waited. While I waited, I started asking around, carefully, the way you ask when you don't want a town to start talking. That's how I found Marion Voss. Marion had been an EMT for 19 years before she retired, and she'd worked the night shift the October I went off the road. I took her to coffee. I didn't lead her. I just asked what she remembered about a rollover on County Road, 12 autumns back. She stirred her coffee a long time. I remember it, she finally said. I remember thinking the damage didn't sit right for a car that just drifted off alone. I asked her what she meant. She shook her head slowly. Been a while, but something about the driver's side. I wrote it up. It'd be in the run sheet. There it was again. The run sheet. The document nobody had attached to my file. I thanked Marion, drove home, and that night I didn't press my palms to my armrests to steady a memory. I pressed them down because, for the first time, the memory was steadying me. Marion gave me one more name before we finished our coffee. There was an old fella who stopped that night, she said. Stood by the ditch the whole time. He kept telling the officer he'd seen a truck. His name was Walt Whitfield, and he was 81 now, sharp as a tack, and lonely in the way that made him glad I'd called. I went to see him on a Tuesday. He made me weak coffee and told me the whole thing without my asking twice. He'd been driving home from his sister's when he came over the rise on County Road 12 and saw a pickup stopped half on the shoulder, lights off, and my car upside down in the ditch beyond it. By the time he pulled over, the pickup was pulling away. Dark truck, he said. I got most of the plate, gave it to the young officer right there at the scene. He'd never heard another word about it. Nobody followed up. Nobody called. He'd assumed, like decent people do, that the police had handled it. I sat in Walt Whitfield's kitchen and felt 2 years of being called confused fall away from me like water off a roof. A man I'd never met had stood in a ditch and seen exactly what I'd seen. A truck. A real one, with a real plate, that someone had written down and someone else had made disappear. I asked Walt if he'd be willing to say all that again, on the record, to the right person. He set down his cup. "Young lady," he said, "I've been waiting 2 years for somebody to ask." My father found me at my apartment a week later. He never came to my apartment. The lack of stairs seemed to offend him. But there he was at my door, and he didn't sit. "You went to see Walt Whitfield," he said. The town had leaked again. I didn't deny it. I asked him why that bothered him so much, if there was nothing to find. That's when the real reason finally came out. The one underneath all the talk about healing and family. "Do you have any idea what a thing like this would do to the company?" he said. His voice was low and fast now. "We are this close to the distribution contract. This close. You start dragging the police back into a 2-year-old wreck? You put a cloud over the family name, and that contract walks. 11 drivers. Heather. Your cousin Pete's job. The whole yard." So that was it. That was the wall I'd been feeling on my neck for 2 years. Not grief, not even shame. A contract. My father looked at me like I was a load that wouldn't balance, and he said it one more time, the family drumbeat. Except now I could hear what it actually meant. Let it go. For the family. For the company, he meant. He'd just told me himself. I looked at my father, a man I had loved my whole life, and I felt the last soft thing in me go quiet and practical. He hadn't come to protect me. He'd come to protect a contract that was worth more to him than the truth about his daughter's spine. "Okay, Dad," I said, and I closed the door and I called the lawyer. My mother came alone, 2 days after my father did, and she was different. She didn't lead with the company. She didn't lead with anything. She sat on my couch with her purse in her lap like a woman in a waiting room, and for a while she just looked at her hands. Some nights, she started, and then she stopped. She tried again. Some nights I lie awake and she couldn't finish it. I watched my mother stand at the edge of the truth, lean toward it, and step back. I could have pushed. A harder woman would have pushed. But I've learned that you can see a person clearly and still let them keep their last bit of cover, not for their sake, for yours. "Mom," I said, "if there's something you know, you can tell me. Now, or later, or never. But I'm going to find out either way." Her eyes came up, wet and frightened, and for 1 second I thought she'd say it. Then she pressed her lips together and reached for the old script. "Your father knows best how to protect us," she said. "He always has." She stood, smoothed her skirt, and let herself out. I didn't hate her. That's the part people don't expect. I looked at my mother choosing fear over her own daughter, and what I felt wasn't hate. It was a kind of grief for a woman who'd decided, a long time ago, that surviving my father meant never seeing too much. She knew something. I was sure of it now, and the fact that she couldn't say it out loud told me it was big enough to be worth saying. His name was Daniel Coleman, and he'd handled personal injury and accident cases for 30 years out of a modest office above a hardware store. I picked him because he wasn't flashy and because he listened to the whole thing without once looking at me the way my family did. When I finished, he was quiet a moment. "You've already done half my job," he said. "Most clients bring me a feeling. You brought me a witness and a missing document." Coleman explained what came next in plain terms. He'd send formal letters to the relevant parties telling them to preserve any records connected to the accident, so nothing could quietly disappear now that questions were being asked. He'd help me get the EMS run sheet pushed through. And depending on what it showed, he said, we'd talk about whether there was enough to ask the county to look at the case again. He was careful with his words. He never promised. He said, depending. He said, if. He said, we'll see what the paper says. I trusted him more for it. On my way out of his office, I took a wrong turn through the industrial strip on the south end of town, past a low cinder block building with two bay doors open. The smell hit me before I saw the sign. Fresh auto paint and primer and engine oil, sharp and chemical, rolling out of the open bays. Ostrander Auto Body. Dale Ostrander had been my father's friend for 40 years. I didn't think anything of it that day. I just noticed the smell, the way you notice a name you'll need later. I drove the rest of the way home with my windows down, and I'd stopped asking my family to believe me. I was building something that wouldn't need them to. The EMS run sheet arrived on a Thursday, in a thin envelope that weighed almost nothing and changed everything. A certified copy, stamped and signed. I made myself a cup of coffee before I opened it, because I knew that once I read it, I couldn't unread it, and I wanted one more ordinary minute first. Then I sat down at my kitchen table, slid out the pages, and read the paramedic's own words from the night I supposedly lost control all by myself. It was clinical and short and devastating. Under the scene narrative, the crew had written what they observed before anyone cleaned the story up. Paint transfer along the driver's side door and quarter panel, a color that wasn't my car's, inconsistent with a single vehicle rollover. And below that, a note about the debris field and the angle of the intrusion, the crumple pushed inward from the side, the way metal folds when something hits you, not when you drift off a road alone. The paramedic had even flagged it. Recommend investigation of possible second vehicle. There it was, in handwriting, certified, 2 years old. A second vehicle. Paint that wasn't mine, ground into the door beside where my body had been. I read it once. I read it again. I read it a third time. Slower. The way you press on a bruise to be sure it's real. My family had spent 2 years telling me I was confused, that there was no truck, that I was performing my own injury for attention. And the paramedics who pulled me out of that ditch had written, on the night it happened, that someone had hit me and driven away. I didn't reach for the phone, and I didn't fall apart. I sat very still with my palms flat on the table, and I said it out loud, just once, to the empty kitchen, almost a whisper. I'm not faking. There was a truck. Then I made a copy, locked the original in my files, and started looking for whose paint it was. Coleman moved fast once he saw the run sheet. A second vehicle changes everything, legally. It turns my sad solo accident into a hit-and run with a victim in a wheelchair. And that is a very different file. The question was simple and terrible. Whose truck? I thought about Walt Whitfield's dark pickup and his partial plate. I thought about my father coming to my door, fast and low, talking about contracts. And I thought about a cinder block building on the south end of town that smelled of fresh paint. Coleman knew how to ask the questions I couldn't ask without tipping anyone off. Body shops keep records. They have to, for parts and insurance and taxes, and those records leave a trail through suppliers and insurers that a patient investigator can follow. It took his investigator 2 weeks of careful work, but he came back with a copy of an invoice from Ostrander Auto Body, dated 3 days after my accident. Front left panel, fender, and a full repaint. The vehicle was a dark pickup. The owner of record was my brother, Nolan Merrill, and the job had been paid in cash, in full, the same day, by a man whose name was written in Dale Ostrander's own ledger, Raymond Merrill, my father. I sat with that invoice next to the run sheet and let the 2 pieces of paper finish the sentence my family had been refusing to let me say for 2 years. A truck hit me. My brother was driving it. And 3 days later, my father paid cash to erase the dent his son left in my spine. The smell from those open bay doors made sense now. They hadn't just repaired a truck. They'd repainted it. But it had never occurred to them to worry about my car. The wreck had been totaled and towed to a salvage yard on the county line, and it had sat there untouched for 2 years, the foreign paint still ground into the driver's door exactly where the paramedics had logged it. They'd sanded the proof off Nolan's fender and forgotten it was waiting on mine. Coleman told me what I already suspected, that a civil case and a criminal case are 2 different roads, and I could walk both. The civil road was mine to drive. I could sue. The criminal road belonged to the county, and for that I needed someone with a badge to care. He made a call, and that's how I ended up across a desk from Detective Pruitt, a tired, methodical woman who'd seen enough small-town cover-ups to be hard to surprise and still be willing to dig. I laid it out in order. The run sheet, the paint transfer, the witness with the partial plate, the body shop invoice for my brother's truck, paid in cash by my father, 3 days after. Pruitt read it all twice without saying anything. Then she leaned back. "I'll be straight with you," she said. "Hit and run with serious injury isn't a misdemeanor. The clock on something like this runs a lot longer than people think, and when a case has been cold, new evidence can be enough to take another look." She tapped the run sheet. "This is new evidence. This should never have been left out of the file." She didn't promise me an arrest. She didn't promise me anything. She said she'd pull the original file, see who'd worked it, and find out how a run sheet recommending a second vehicle investigation had gone missing from a serious injury wreck. But she said one more thing as I was leaving, almost to herself. "Somebody made a choice to bury this." I drove home with my hands steady on the controls. For 2 years, my family had told me there was nothing to find. I had just handed a detective enough to make her start looking. The quiet part was almost over. Nolan came to see me alone, which he never did, and that's how I knew the family had felt the ground shift. He didn't bring his warm voice this time. He sat across from me at my own kitchen table, the same table where the run sheet had been, and he looked at me with something I'd never seen on my brother's face before. Fear, wearing the mask of anger. "I know you've been talking to people," he said. I didn't answer. I've found that silence does most of my arguing for me now. "It was an accident," he said, and his voice cracked on the word. "You think I meant for that to happen? You think I wanted my own sister in a chair?" And then he said the thing I'll carry the rest of my life, the thing that finally told me exactly how a person justifies leaving their sister in a ditch. He leaned in, and he said quietly, like he was the reasonable one, "You were always going to end up in that chair eventually, the way you drove. Don't take my whole life over a few inches of spine." A few inches of spine. That's what my body was to him. A rounding error in the story of his future, his license, his place at the company. He'd convinced himself the math worked out, that my legs were a smaller loss than his career, and he'd been living comfortably inside that math for 2 years. For the first time, my brother wasn't pretending the truck didn't exist. He was bargaining over the price of it. I told him I thought he should leave. He stood, and at the door he turned. "Don't ruin the party," he said. "You'll regret it." I wouldn't, as it turned out. But he would. Quick word, because some of you have been where I was about to go. If you've ever had someone tell you to stay quiet to protect the very people who hurt you, you already know how heavy paper can feel in your lap. I'm almost to the part where it stopped being mine to carry alone. Hit subscribe so the next person who needs this finds it, and tell me in the comments, would you have gone to that party? Stay with me, because I did. Detective Pruitt called me 11 days later. She'd pulled the original file, and she'd found the run sheet's absence wasn't an accident. The summary that got circulated had been the short version, and the responding officer who'd handled the scene was, yes, my father's Thursday night card partner, now retired. She was reopening the investigation. Quietly. She asked me to do the hardest thing I'd done yet, which was nothing. Say nothing. Change nothing. Don't tip Nolan. Don't confront my father. Don't let the family know the ground had opened under them, because the moment they knew, the cash and the friendships would start papering over the cracks again. So I went quiet on purpose. I smiled at Sunday dinners. I let my father believe his drumbeat had finally worked, that I'd let it go for the family. And underneath the table, Coleman was preparing a civil complaint, and Pruitt was running a plate and subpoenaing Ostrander's original records through the reopened case, and a county examiner was lifting the foreign paint from my old car at the salvage yard and matching its color code and primer layers to the factory finish of Nolan's make and model, and Walt Whitfield was giving a formal statement in a small gray room. The quiet wasn't surrender. The quiet was a fuse. I'd spent 2 years being told to be silent, and now, finally, my silence was working for me instead of against me. I just had to hold it a little longer. The invitation to the engagement party came on heavy cream paper, addressed in my mother's careful hand. For a moment it almost worked on me, that small girlish part that still wanted to be wanted by these people. Then I understood what the invitation actually was. It wasn't an olive branch, it was a stage. My family wanted me there at the lodge in front of 60 guests, smiling, included, visibly fine, so that the whole town could see the Merrills were whole and happy and had nothing to hide. I was being invited to play the role of the daughter they'd reconciled with. A united front. I almost said no. Then I thought about timing. Coleman had told me the civil complaint would be ready to file within the week. Pruitt had told me her investigation was close to a point of no return. Everything I'd built over 2 years was about to come due at almost the same moment, whether I was at a party or sitting alone in my kitchen. And there was something else. Something I'm not proud of and won't pretend I didn't feel. After 2 years of being made invisible at the end of the table, I wanted to be in the room when the truth arrived. Not to throw it. I didn't have to throw anything. I just wanted to be present when it landed. So I wrote back yes, in my own careful hand. I bought a navy dress. I had my chair cleaned and my hair done. And I drove out to Carlton Lake on a warm Saturday evening, 25 minutes through golden light, completely calm, carrying nothing in my hands and everything in a lawyer's office across town. My father caught me in the gravel lot before I'd even reached the lodge ramp. He crouched down beside my chair so we were eye to eye, which from him was less tenderness than strategy. "Tonight's important," he said, "for your brother, for the company. I need you to understand that." I told him I understood it completely. "Don't make a scene," he said. "Whatever's in your head tonight is not the night." And my mother appeared at his shoulder, twisting her rings, her eyes already pleading. "Please, Heather," she whispered, "just one night. For the family." There it was, the old drumbeat, one last time, in the gravel, under the string lights. Let it go. For the family. I looked up at the two of them, my father strategizing, my mother begging, and I felt something that surprised me with its gentleness. I wasn't angry anymore. You can't be angry at a wall once you've decided to walk around it. "I'm not here to make a scene, Dad," I said, and I meant every word. "I don't have to. I really don't." He took that as surrender, the way he took everything as surrender, and he stood, satisfied, and went to greet his guests. My mother held my gaze 1 second longer, and I watched the fear cross her face, because she, of all of them, half understood that my calm wasn't the same as my agreement. Then she turned and followed him. I sat in the warm evening for a moment, alone in the gravel, and I let my palms rest on the cold aluminum of my armrests one more time, the oldest comfort I had. Then I rolled myself up the ramp and into the room where it would happen. The lodge was beautiful, I'll give my mother that. Carlton Lake sat black and silver through the tall windows, and someone had strung lights across the rafters, and a two-piece band played quiet standards in the corner. 60-some guests stood in clusters with champagne, the women in good dresses, the men in their one nice jacket. Waiters moved through with trays, and everywhere there was that bright, ringing sound of glasses touching glasses, a high, clean chime that carried over the music. I found a spot near the windows where I could see the whole room and not block a path, the way you learn to do, and I accepted a glass of sparkling water and watched my family perform happiness. They were good at it. Nolan worked the room like a man running for office, his arm around Bree, shaking hands, laughing too loud. My father held court by the bar. My mother floated between tables, adjusting flowers that didn't need adjusting. For a little while, I was just furniture again, the daughter in the chair by the window, and nobody bothered me, and I let them not bother me, because I knew the night was young. Then it came time for toasts. Nolan tapped a fork against his glass, that high ringing chime again, and the room hushed and turned to him. He thanked everyone for coming. He praised Bree until she blushed. And then, because he could never quite leave it alone, because some part of him needed to manage me even in his own happy moment, he raised his glass in my direction and said, with a little performed tenderness, "And my sister, Heather, who's had it harder than she lets on." The room turned to look at me, and I smiled, and I waited. It might have ended there, a backhanded toast and a few sympathetic murmurs, if a kind woman near me hadn't decided to be kind. She was one of Bree's aunts, soft and well-meaning, and she leaned toward me when the toasts broke up and asked gently, "Honey, can I ask what happened? Were you born this way? Or was it the accident I heard about?" There was nothing cruel in it. I answered her plainly, the way I'd decided long ago to answer that question whenever it came, with the truth and without drama. "It was a car accident 2 years ago," I said. "Someone hit me and drove off." That was all. A simple sentence, true on its face. But Nolan was close enough to hear it, and Nolan had been drinking since before the guests arrived, and the word hit landed on him like a match on dry grass. He turned, loud, his face already flushed. "Oh, here we go," he said, and the nearest clusters of guests went quiet. "Don't, Heather, not tonight." I hadn't said anything to him. I said so. And that's when my brother, at his own engagement party, with 60 people watching, threw his arm wide and announced it to the room. The sentence the family had been whispering for 2 years, now shouted into the light. "She's faking it for sympathy. She always has. She put herself in that chair, and she's been blaming this family for it ever since." The band stopped. Somewhere a glass was set down hard. 60 faces swung between my brother and me, and the kind aunt put her hand to her mouth, and the whole bright room tilted on the edge of something. I didn't flinch. I'd been waiting 2 years to hear him say it where witnesses could hear it too. My father crossed the room fast. I watched him calculate it on the move. The guests, the contract people standing near the bar, the disaster of his son screaming, faking it, at a cripple in front of the whole county. He needed to shut it down, and the fastest way my father knew to shut down a problem was to crush the smaller party. So he didn't tell Nolan to stop. He turned on me. He stood over my chair, his back to the room so they couldn't see his face, and in a voice pitched just loud enough to carry, he said, "Sit there and be quiet. You have always been the family's biggest failure, and you are not going to ruin your brother's night to make yourself the center of attention." The family's biggest failure. There it was, the third stone, thrown in front of 60 people. I looked up at my father, and past his shoulder I saw my mother. She was standing very still by the cake table, and she had turned her face toward the dark windows, toward the lake, toward anything that wasn't her daughter on the floor of this moment. She wouldn't look at me. She had decided, one more time, that surviving him meant not seeing me. The room was dead silent now. Bree had both hands over her mouth. The contract men were studying their shoes. And I understood that my family had just done, in public, in front of every witness that mattered, the exact thing they'd done to me in private for 2 years. They'd called me a liar and a burden and dared the room to agree. The only difference was the audience. They'd given me 60 witnesses. They had no idea what a gift that was. I should have left it there. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to stay silent and let their cruelty hang in the air for the whole room to smell. But I am human, and after 2 years I allowed myself one sentence. I looked at my brother, calm as still water, and I said, "There was another car, Nolan, and I know what color it was painted." His face changed. Not anger, panic, the specific white panic of a man who hears a door he thought was locked swing open. And panic in a drunk man with everything to lose is a dangerous thing. He came at me fast. Before anyone could move, before my father could even turn, Nolan grabbed the arms of my wheelchair and yanked, hard, twisting, and the chair went over, and so did I. I hit the wood floor on my hip and shoulder, my legs folding the way they fold now, useless and heavy, and the whole room gasped as one. Glass shattered somewhere. A woman screamed. And over all of it I heard, faint and clear at the same time, a man's low, urgent voice near the door. One of Bree's uncles, a quiet, retired man, speaking fast into his phone. "Yes, Carlton Lake Lodge. A man just assaulted a woman in a wheelchair. Please hurry." The bright ringing of champagne glasses was gone. In its place was a terrible silence, and inside that silence, the steady voice of a stranger giving an address to a dispatcher. I lay on the floor of my brother's engagement party, with my family standing over me, and I did the only thing I had left, the thing they'd never been able to take. I stayed calm, and I waited. Here is what they expected. They expected me to cry, to scream, to become small and broken on that floor, so that the moment could be folded back into the old story. Poor, unstable Heather. See how she falls apart. See what she does to this family. That is not what happened. I lay there a moment, taking stock the way you learn to when your body can't always tell you what it's done. Nothing broke. Then I pushed myself up on one arm, slow and steady, and I righted my own chair. And a young waiter, not one of my family, crouched and helped me back into it with the kind of plain decency none of my blood had shown me in 2 years. "Thank you," I told him evenly. "I've got it from here." My father was hissing at Nolan now, trying to get him out a side door before anyone official arrived, and my mother had finally turned around, both hands pressed to her chest, and Bree was crying, and the room was a storm of whispering. And in the center of it I sat in my righted chair, hands folded in my lap, perfectly calm, and that calm did something to the room. It changed the story in real time. They had wanted a hysterical woman to explain away. What they had instead was a composed one, sitting upright in the wreck of their party, waiting for something they couldn't see yet. The guests felt it. They started, one by one, to look at me not with pity, but with a kind of dawning question. Why isn't she afraid? My father caught it too. He stopped mid-sentence and looked at me. Really looked, and for the first time in 2 years I saw doubt cross my father's face. "What did you do?" he said. It wasn't a question. It was a man feeling the floor move. "You can stand over someone your whole life," I thought, "and still be the one who's about to fall." I didn't say it out loud. I just held his eyes, and outside, faint and growing, came the sound of tires on gravel. They came through the double doors together, 5 of them, and the warm party light caught the badges and the radios, and the whole room pulled back against the walls. The lead officer scanned the scene the way they're trained to, looking for the threat, and a dozen hands pointed at once, some at Nolan, some, tellingly, at me. "She fell," my father said immediately, stepping forward with his hand out, his voice sliding into the easy authority that had run this town's rooms for 40 years. "It's a family misunderstanding, officers. There's no need." Someone called about an assault. The lead officer said, not unkindly, and his eyes moved to me. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" And this was the moment I had built for 2 years without knowing its exact shape. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't point at my brother. I reached into the small bag on the side of my chair, and I took out a business card and I held it up. "My name is Heather Merrill," I said. "That man is my brother, Nolan Merrill. He pulled me out of my chair just now, and there are 60 witnesses. This is the card of my attorney, Daniel Coleman." The officer took it, and then I said the rest, slow and clear enough for the whole silent room to hear. 2 years ago, my brother struck my car with his truck and drove away, and my family paid to have the truck repainted. There's an open investigation. Detective Pruitt County. The case number is on the back of that card. For one heartbeat, nobody breathed. Then the room exploded, but not me. Nolan started shouting, "She's lying, she's insane, this is what she does." And my father's voice rose over his, booming, red-faced. "This is a private family matter. You have no right." 2 grown men coming apart at the seams at the same time, loud and frantic and ugly. And in the middle of all that noise I sat still, hands in my lap, and said nothing else, because I didn't need to. The officer was already reading the back of the card. I had told them for 2 years I wasn't faking. I just hadn't been able to prove it. Now the proof was reading my brother his options. The lead officer stepped aside and spoke into his radio, low, and I caught Pruitt's name and a string of numbers. When he came back, his whole manner had changed, because dispatch had confirmed there was a file, a real one, active, with my brother's name already in it. "Mr. Merrill," he said to Nolan, "I need you to step outside with me." That was when the room finished turning. An old man near the door cleared his throat and stepped forward, gray cardigan, careful voice, and I realized with a small shock that Walt Whitfield was there, a guest of Bree's family, because of course, in a town this size, everyone is 3 handshakes from everyone. "I'll say it to anybody who's asking," Walt announced, to the officers, to the room, to all of them. "I stood in that ditch 2 years ago and I saw a dark pickup pull away from her car. I gave the plate to an officer that night. Nobody ever called me back." 60 faces absorbed that. You could watch the official story die on them in real time, watch them recalculate 2 years of pity for the poor, confused Merrill girl into something colder and truer. My father had gone gray. My mother had sat down hard in a folding chair, and Nolan, my brother, looked at me across the ruined party with an expression I'd waited 2 years to see, the look of a man who finally understands that the account has come due. I rolled my chair forward, just a little, just enough to be heard, and I said the only thing I'd been saving for him. My voice was very quiet. "You all kept telling me to let it go for the family." I let it sit a moment. So I did. I let go of the family. Nobody answered me. There was nothing to answer. Bree had taken her ring off. I watched her set it on the cake table without a word, and the officer's hand closed gently on my brother's arm, and the night that was supposed to celebrate his future became the night it ended. They didn't drag him out in chains. It wasn't a movie. They walked him out to the lot, talked to him at the car, and because there were 60 witnesses to a man assaulting a woman in a wheelchair, they detained him that night on the assault. The older accident, the hit and run, the repainted truck, the buried run sheet, all of that would take longer, and I knew it would. Detective Pruitt had been clear with me from the start. A 2-year-old cover-up doesn't resolve in a parking lot. It resolves in interviews and grand jury rooms and the slow grind of a district attorney deciding what charges the evidence will carry. What happened at the lodge wasn't the verdict. It was the moment the truth stopped being something only I could see. An officer crouched by my chair and took my statement gently while my father stood 20 feet away, no longer the man who ran the room, just an old man whose son was in the back of a patrol car, and my mother. My mother came to me at the very end, when most of the guests had fled and the band had packed up in horrified silence. She knelt down beside my chair, the way she should have done 2 years ago, and she finally said the words she'd swallowed in my apartment. "I knew," she whispered. "God forgive me, Heather. I knew. And I let your father." She broke. I looked at my mother weeping on the floor of the lodge, and I felt the grief I'd been carrying for her finally settle into something I could put down. I didn't forgive her. I'm not sure I ever will. But I reached out and I touched her shoulder. Once, because she was still my mother, and because even endings deserve a little mercy. Then I left. I didn't wait for anyone to help me, and I didn't look back to see who watched me go. I rolled myself out through the double doors, down the ramp my mother had grudgingly arranged, across the gravel lot under the string lights, to my own car. I lifted myself in, broke down the chair the way I've done 1,000 times, and stowed it beside me. My hands were steady on the controls. The lake was black glass in my mirror, and the lodge behind me was full of people who would be telling this story for the rest of their lives, the night the Merrills came apart. The night the quiet daughter in the chair turned out to be the only one holding the truth. I came in on these wheels, I thought, and I'm leaving on them. And for once, nobody tried to push. I drove the 25 minutes home through the warm dark, windows down, and I felt none of the things you might expect. No triumph, no gloating, none of it. What I felt was lighter. 2 years of carrying a thing alone, and I'd finally set it down in a room full of people who could no longer pretend it weighed nothing. I let myself into my quiet apartment, and I slept, all the way through the night, for the first time since October 2 years before. The rest came slowly, the way real things do. Over the following months, the district attorney took the case in front of a grand jury, and my brother was charged, not just with the assault at the lodge, but with the older, heavier thing, leaving the scene of an accident that caused serious injury. Because the evidence was strong and the exposure was worse, his lawyers eventually steered him toward a plea rather than a trial, and he went away for a stretch that felt both like a lot and like nothing next to 2 years in a chair. The investigation into the cover-up reached past him, too. My father and Dale Ostrander both faced their own reckoning for what it means to bury a serious injury wreck and pay cash to repaint the proof. The law has names for that, and a county that doesn't like being lied to. The distribution contract my father had traded his daughter for walked, exactly as he'd feared, though not for the reason he'd feared it. And Coleman filed the civil suit, and somewhere in all those months it settled, for an amount I won't repeat, except to say it was enough that I will never again have to ask anyone in my family for anything. Merrill Hauling sold its trucks one by one. My mother lives alone now in the old house. We speak rarely and only on my terms. I don't see my father at all. People ask me sometimes if justice felt good, and the honest answer is that justice didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like a door finally closing on a room I'd been trapped in, quiet and final, with me on the right side of it. I still live in the same one-story apartment, and I still do legal research at the same kitchen table where I once read an ambulance report at midnight. I have a few real friends now, the kind I let all the way in, which is new for me. Carrying that secret alone for 2 years taught me that some weights aren't meant to be private. I bought the better wheelchair, the one the insurance company once denied me. Walt Whitfield and I have lunch every couple of months. He likes the diner by the courthouse, and he still calls me young lady. I don't wait for my father to apologize, because I finally understand he never will, and more importantly, that I don't need him to. That's the part it took me 2 years and a wrecked engagement party to learn. The people who hurt you will almost never hand you the truth. You have to keep it yourself. You have to write it down, date it, and trust your own memory more than their comfort. I stopped asking to be believed. I started keeping the record, and the record set me free. I spent 2 years waiting for the people who hurt me to admit what they had done, and the day I stopped waiting and started writing it down was the day I finally got my life back. That's my story. 2 years of being told I imagined it, one ambulance report, and a party that finally told the truth for me. If this reminded you to trust your own memory, or to keep the paperwork when no one believes you, take that as your sign to do it today. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, share this. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.